So hey guys, we are out here with JJ Racaza, pretty well-known, halfway decent shooter, kidding, world champion, and I want to just see if we can like dig into like a couple of things that maybe we can give for some tips to people that are trying to improve shooting. I've got a few ideas that I think will be like nice 2-3 minute little vignettes for you. But you've been teaching people professionally across the globe really for like 20 years besides being a champion. Is there some things that pop up to you over and over in classes that you see that maybe are like some sticking points for people?
Yes, a lot of times when I'm training guys, a lot of the guys now are fixing their trigger and all that stuff. What I'm noticing is the inefficiencies that's built in within their shooting. And whenever they're shooting and actuating that trigger in and out, they're losing a lot of time where they think they're not, right? And a lot of times this is like the missed opportunity to gain that time. And people always come to me and say, hey, how do I shoot faster and more accurately? And I'm like, well, it starts with how you're manipulating that trigger, because trigger becomes a lot more important other than your sights, obviously, when you're trying to shoot something that's a smaller target and more accurate. So a lot of people, these are some of the things. So I'm going to demo the first way that most people are shooting it and where it's causing a lot of delay. I'm just going to load it up. I'm going to shoot 3 rounds and I'm going to show you guys some of the things that I've seen in regards to how people shoot. And I want you guys to kind of focus on the way I'm pulling the trigger, right? So I'm going to adjust my grip a little bit so you guys can see it. I'm going to prep the trigger, fire the shot, reset, and you can hear that click. The gun goes back, the finger goes off in a little bit, comes back to the wall, fire that shot again, and that click, and then I'm going to do that one more time, fire that shot, and then that click. Every single time that I hear a clicking motion, right, it's a little bit accurate, right? I know my gun's shooting a little bit high, so I figured that out just now. That's like my baseline 0. So every time I hear that click, it's basically an it's to me a sign, a symptom of their inefficiency within that trigger. They're pinning the trigger to the rear slightly. They're trying to control that sights to go back on target before they release and let the gun reset itself. And then you'll hear that click because the trigger is actually resetting, and then they go back to the prep and all that stuff. And a lot of times, because that's been taught for so many years, to stay in contact with their trigger. So people want to hold on to that trigger and try to hold on to it. And then to me, that's like that's such a fault, because when you start to shoot fast, some of the things that will happen is what's called click banging. A lot of people will pin the trigger to the rear, and when you start shooting fast and accurately, people will slowly release that trigger to the rear, and you hear the click, and they immediately want to snap the shot, and that will cause all types of deviation on target. And instead of doing that, I want you guys to reverse it, right? So now you're going to learn the pulling the trigger, and I'm going to shoot the next target up, whatever. I'm going to shoot the same exact target, I guess, so it'll be kind of consistent. The grouping shouldn't change much. I'm going to shoot the gun, but this way I'm going to actuate the trigger, and I'm going to leave the trigger back right away. So to me, before I even get to this, I'm going to talk about the 3 stages of trigger. The first stage is basically when your finger is in the trigger guard, not necessarily touching the trigger. I call that floating. The second stage is when you've prepped the trigger, you pushed it and eliminated any more slack or movement on that trigger. You're at the wall. I call that's the number 2 stage, and that's prepping the trigger. Move it further back. That's called bang, right? And then the gun's gonna cycle, and what I do then to reset and prep is to go back to 1, 2, and I want to be back to 2 as soon as possible. By holding the trigger to the rear, the gun is done and ready to fire. However, the only reason that it can't fire is because I've held the trigger to the rear. So now the gun is rendered useless until I let that trigger reset. So instead of me doing that, I want the gun to do that by firing it and immediately releasing that trigger and going right back to that wall, right? So that's the number 1 thing that my goal is, to get back to that wall, because everything that starts with shooting an accurate shot to me is being able to get to that wall first. So in order for me to shoot fast the next accurate shot, I have to be able to recycle my trigger fast enough to get right back to the trigger. So it's gonna look something like this. I'm gonna prep my trigger, and I'm gonna fire, and you're gonna slow motion. I'm gonna release it quick, but just to show you that my gun and my finger left the trigger as soon as I fire the gun. Here we go. My finger's already off the trigger. I'm gonna slowly come back onto that wall. I'm gonna do the same exact thing. Fingers off the trigger, slowly come back to that wall. I'm gonna do the last final thing. Finger off the trigger, slowly come, and I'm not even gonna come back to the wall because I'm done firing, right? So with all that said, I exaggerated leaving the trigger, and I was not necessarily coming back to the wall, but I was just one less inefficient from the previous shooter, because the previous shooter pinned it to the rear, and every single shot you heard that audible sear click. My grouping on target didn't change much. In fact, it actually got better, right? So the second thing that the third thing I'm going to do, and that was the next step, is to be able to improve from pinning the trigger to the rear. The want to hold the gun to the rear doesn't necessarily affect the trigger. As soon as I break the shot, I'm out of that trigger. That doesn't affect the accuracy at all. Most people think and want to argue like, hey, it's affecting his shots a little bit. Like, oh no, you don't have to, because it's not a big rifle. I don't have to pin the trigger to the rear as part of my follow through. That's just slowing me down for the next good shot. So this next third demo that I'm gonna do is the most efficient way I want you to do it, right? After some time, you get used to letting go of the trigger. I want you to now work on learning how to get back on that trigger as fast as possible, getting back to number 2. Number 2 is where we start the actual firing of the gun, and also that number 2 is where we will end the firing cycle of the gun. So once I go from number 2, boom, prep the trigger, break the shot, I'm gonna go right back to that prep again to end the cycle of my shooting. So I'm gonna repeat that over and over, and this next 3 shots, you're gonna see my finger literally do the same exact movement, except it's gonna be a lot faster. I'm gonna do it slow first. I'm gonna prep the trigger, fire the shot, I'm gonna release it. You're not gonna hear an audible sear click, and you're gonna see my finger move back to that wall fairly quick, not fairly quickly, fairly smoothly, so you can see it in video. I'm gonna do that for 3 shots, and then the next 3 shots after that, I'm gonna do it the way I would do it if I was shooting a match, a competition, or something like that, in order for me to be able to shoot it. I'm gonna fire the first 3 rounds in slow motion, but I'm gonna go back to the wall to show you guys the full cycle of an actual trigger pull that I like to talk about. So now I'm gonna adjust my grip again. I'm gonna fire. I'm gonna prep my trigger. I'm gonna start from the fire, and I'm gonna break the shot. And now as soon as I break the shot, you can see my fingers off the trigger already. Maybe you can see it, maybe you can't. Then I'm gonna slowly prep the trigger. I'm gonna do the same exact thing for that shot, and the same exact thing. You're gonna see my finger go back to that wall, stop on the wall before I break the next shot, and then finger off the trigger a little bit, right? So the next 3 shots, I'm going to fire as soon, I'm gonna go rotate my finger as quickly as I can right back to that wall. So right now, my gun is ready to fire. I'm already on that wall. Again, right now, my finger's right back. And the last and final shot, right now, my finger's right on that wall again. Right now, even if I slowly move my finger, release it, you won't hear that audible sear click, because I cycled the trigger when it was useless to me, when it was open here, let my finger go. And then as soon as it came back, I prepped my trigger right back again just before my sights got onto the target. So with that said, by doing that, those 2 specific things, those are really important in regards to increasing your speed at distance while maintaining a certain level of accuracy. Just remember this saying, it's not how I come off the trigger, it's how I come back on it that makes a difference, whether it's a good shot or not for the next particular subsequent shot that I'm going to fire.
Say that last part again.
It is not how you come off the trigger, it is how you come back on it that makes a difference for your next subsequent shots, whether it's going to be a good shot or a bad shot. So don't try to pin it to the rear, it's not going to make it any better. Let it go and rotate. It's much easier to find that wall from the front of the gun than from the rear of the gun. Does that make sense to you guys, right? So in double action, it's much easier to find that wall from the front of the gun than trying to find it from the rear of the gun. And that's why a lot of people, when they pin the trigger to the rear, they try to shoot it, they'll end up doing a short stroke, and they'll end up inducing their own malfunction because they short stroke the trigger. Or they'll do what's called click banging. They'll do one of those, and then they'll throw a shot completely off the target. So with that saying, one of the things that I said is come back to the wall as fast as you possibly can. Learn that, but do it in progression as I just showed you. Learn how to let go of the trigger first, then slowly come onto the prep before firing, separating the 2 things, prepping and firing. Only if you're shooting an accurate shot. And that's it. Other than that, guys, this is JJ Racaza signing out with CCW Safe and CarryTrainer.
This is like one of those Tom Sawyer machines where you get your buddies to start cleaning stuff up because you're like, oh, it's so fun. It's so fun. Don't you want to try? No, you can't try because it's my turn. It's my turn. It's not your turn. And people are like, let me try. Why can't I try? You're like, shut up. I'm doing it. I'm having the brass knuckles. Get off my back.